welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing a bit of a pivot, a really necessary one, actually. We usually spend a ton of time analyzing how to best support newcomers and build inclusive communities. But right now, we are turning the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus lens inward. We're going to examine the hidden realities of the settlement sector itself. To do this, we'll be diving right into Module 4 of the GBA Plus Community Training course, which focuses entirely on workforce sustainability and capacity. So let's kick things off with a pretty provocative question about the very foundation of our immigrant support infrastructure. We expect a massive amount from frontline workers at non-governmental organizations and community groups. They are quite literally the essential first responders to systemic exclusion. But who is actually supporting the people supporting our newcomers? Well, as we're going to see, the data paints a rather alarming picture of a system that is pushing right up against its breaking point. We really need to confront this stark contrast. Outwardly, settlement agencies project a truly noble mission, right? Empowering newcomers, dismantling barriers, and building systemic equity. But inwardly, the harsh material reality their workers face is completely different. The research reveals a sector defined by enduring burnout, chronic underfunding, low wages, and precarious status. The hard truth is we absolutely cannot apply an equity lens to our communities if the organizations doing the heavy lifting are fundamentally inequitable environments themselves. Think about incredibly diverse communities, like the neighborhoods in Toronto's Southwest, where over 40% of the population are newcomers. We see these vibrant neighborhoods relying so heavily on essential settlement infrastructures, but we rarely stop to think about the vulnerability of the frontline staff walking those exact same streets. These are the people facilitating language training, navigating the housing crisis for refugees, and fighting for basic human rights, yet they're often operating on the absolute margins themselves. All right, bringing us to our first major point, the demographic paradox, looking specifically at racialized and feminized labor in the settlement sector. Consider this massive imbalance in the sector. A staggering 81% of the settlement workforce identifies as female. This sector runs incredibly heavily on feminized care labor. And as the GBA Plus analysis shows us, because this work is so highly feminized, it's systemically undervalued by institutions and funders. The heavy emotional and structural lifting required to integrate newcomers isn't treated as highly specialized professional labor. Instead, it's often viewed as just an expected, undercompensated extension of care work. And it doesn't stop there. This workforce is also highly racialized, with the largest proportions of staff identifying as Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Black. So here is the paradox. The very people tasked with dismantling systemic barriers for marginalized newcomers are very often the ones facing those exact same barriers daily. They are absorbing the trauma of the communities they serve while simultaneously trying to navigate their own marginalization. Which leads right into Section 2, Shared Vulnerability, focusing on the precarity and burnout crisis. The financial reality here is frankly jarring. Despite incredibly high organizational expectations and the heavy emotional burdens of dealing with trauma, displacement, and systemic discrimination, average frontline wages in this sector sit between just $40,000 and $60,000. In cities experiencing unprecedented cost of living and housing crises, wages like that place these essential workers firmly in a state of deep economic precarity. And the human cost of that precarity? It's devastating. A staggering 75% of workers in the settlement sector experiencing burnout report poor mental health, and nearly half screen positive for depression. That is huge. The unrealistic workloads, combined with chronic underfunding and emotional exhaustion, results in a profound depletion. And this doesn't just harm the workers. It directly threatens the quality of client care and the sustainability of the entire system. So we end up with this profound overlap in crises. While clients are facing severe housing shortages, rapid inflation, and precarious immigration statuses, the frontline staff are navigating those exact same hurdles, often for themselves or their immediate families. The person helping a refugee navigate an impossible eviction notice is quite honestly likely facing an unmanageable rent hike themselves. This beautiful mural, titled The Dreamers, is such a perfect visual metaphor for this. It reminds us of the profound weight of this work. The workers fighting for the dreams, safety, and integration of newcomers are carrying immense weight and identical systemic burdens themselves. They are attempting to lift others up while their own foundations are incredibly fragile. Moving on to Section 3, turning the lens inward, and moving from performative equity to real accountability. If you take just one thing away from this explainer, make it this. Organizations absolutely cannot project equity outward if they do not practice it inward. Performative equity, saying all the right things in a grant proposal or a shiny community brochure, it's completely unsustainable if your internal structures are actively reproducing inequity and exploiting your staff. You just can't build a just community on the backs of an exhausted, underpaid workforce.
So how do we fix it? That brings us to Section 4, assessing internal readiness, and the actual tools for organizational transformation.
Think of these 3 steps as a kind of chronological roadmap for organizational leadership. It's a systematic way to audit and reform their internal structures. You start by understanding who is actually on your staff. You then look at who holds the power on your board. And finally, you assess if your team actually has the capacity to do complex equity work. Let's break these down one by one.
First up, we have staff diversity and inclusion identity surveys. Now, this isn't just some corporate checklist. This is about gathering safe, anonymous demographic data so leadership genuinely understands the composition of their teams. And why does this matter? Because this data is absolutely crucial for identifying blind spots and creating highly inclusive HR policies. When you know your staff's actual demographics and pressures, you can implement targeted mental health supports and flexible working conditions that actively prevent that burnout we were just talking about.
Second, we have to look right at the top of the organizational chart using board diversity matrices. These are survey templates used to map out the diversity of the board of directors. It's a tool to ensure that governance actually reflects the communities being served. This is all about shifting power dynamics at the highest strategic levels of the NGO, making sure that the voices of marginalized communities aren't just consulted down at the front line, but are actually up there steering the ship.
And finally, staff GBA plus readiness surveys. Look, before an organization launches some massive, ambitious, external community program, they need to assess the baseline knowledge and emotional capacity of their own staff. Are the frontline workers trained, supported, and ready to engage in complex equity work? This survey identifies where foundational professional development and crucial support is required first. It really all boils down to this fundamental truth. Organizations cannot effectively support the diverse needs of newcomers if their internal structures reproduce inequity and exploitation. It's like building a house, right? You absolutely have to secure the foundation before you start inviting people inside. Applying GBA Plus internally ensures that operational foundations and staff well-being are strong enough to sustain truly transformative community work.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. If our systems exploit the helpers, how can we ever achieve true equity for the newly arrived? True systemic transformation isn't just about the services we provide outward. It is fundamentally about how we treat, value, and protect the people providing them inward. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this gave you a powerful new lens through which to view the incredible work of the settlement sector.